Saluti a tutti. Welcome to another episode of Ciao DMV, the newest podcast dedicated to Italian and Italian American life in the DMV, aka DC, Maryland, and Virginia. From family stories to little known history to businesses to cultural events, etc. Mostly the good, but sometimes the not so good. I am Joseph Barone, your host, and today on Ciao DMV, I would like to welcome Joe LaFonte, who was the immediate past president of the Lido Civic Club. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on.
And we're glad to have you. And for our listeners who do not know, the Lido Civic Club of Washington, D.C. was established in 1929 with the primary goal of assisting recent Italian immigrants to become assimilated into the ways of American business. And as Italian Americans in the Washington area have become more successful and affluent, the goals of the club have shifted towards more civic-minded activities that help not only the Italian American community, but the Washington metropolitan area in general. Since 1929, the club has brought together Washington area Italian American businessmen and professionals, not only to enjoy their shared business interests, but also share their Italian American culture while volunteering in various philanthropic activities. And so once again, Joe, welcome. So, Joe, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I am an Italian American. My grandfather came over from Sicily back in the late 1920, and he became naturalized. Came through Ellis Island, and then he met my grandmother, and then certainly got married, and he had my mom, and so I'm full Italian. Everybody on my family side is from Sicily. I'm married for what will be 35 years coming up in July to my wife, Virginia. She's also part Italian, and her family originates from Sicily as well, the part that's Italian. So we're native New Yorkers. We came down to the Washington area in 2000 for my business in the construction industry. Been in the construction industry for 40 years. So we came down, we landed in Purcellville, Virginia, which was a little bit of a shock to a native New Yorker when you move out to Purcellville, Virginia. It's a little bit of a Mayberry, but we love it, and we've been there now. We're in our 26th year. We have three children, Cassandra, Cabrina, and Joseph, and basically they've been raised for the most part all their life here. We're grandparents. We have a granddaughter, Ellie, which she's about 16 months old, and we have a son-in-law as well, Grant. And so that's a little bit about me and my family. I am a partner at Harvey Cleary Builders, which is a construction company that originated out of Houston, Texas. I co-manage our Bethesda office, which really runs work up and down the East Coast. A little bit about me. I love coaching. I'm a former wrestler, football player, played college baseball. I've coached for many years, both wrestling and football.
Well, great. Well, thank you. And Joe, your background a little bit, at least for your on the grandparents on the Sicily side, it's so and part of your life sort of parallels mine. My father's parents, although both my grandparents come from Sicily, my father's grandparents came to the U.S. My grandfather came about that particular period of time. I also grew up in New York City, not on the island. But where in Sicily do your grandparents come from?
So my dad's side of the family comes from Palermo.
Okay.
My mom's side of the family comes from Trapani and Agrigento.
Okay.
So, and it's kind of funny. They all, if you look at the map, they're all kind of intertwined. They all touch each other. So that's where we're from.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, mine come from not too far from Agrigento, from Ragusa and a small town called Militello in Val di Catania. So how did you wind up becoming a member of Lido?
So back in, I want to say 2018, a very, very dear friend of mine, he's like my brother, Vito Germanario, was honored as Lido's Man of the Year. And Vito had invited my wife and I as his guests to that evening. And I didn't know what Lido was, to be honest. And I went that night, and if I remember correctly, Tom Rignanti was outgoing president, and Enzo Fragmini was incoming president. And I was surrounded by so many wonderful Italian Americans, and just I had a chance that night to talk to so many of the members. And I remember leaving there and calling Vito the next day and saying, I have to I have to somehow join this. This is what I grew up in. It reminded me very much of when I was a kid. My dad and all my uncles would huddle in the living room on Sundays, and I would sit at the end of the couch just wanting to be around them. That's what I felt like that night. And as I went to my next meeting, which had happened to be the Christmas meeting, I left there and all I wanted to become was a member. I was so excited to learn about Lido, to meet so many wonderful men, Italian American men. I gotta tell you, I just felt it felt right, it felt comfortable, it felt like being at home.
Yeah, and that's to be honest, that's kind of the way I feel, and for our listeners, I am a member of the Lido Club, and I kind of feel that way. I really feel this camaraderie with everyone else. Now, when you actually became a member, other than president and VP, did you hold any other roles in Lido?
I did. So about 6 months in, they threw me really into the deep end, and they had me become the financial chair. And I took over for a gentleman named Charlie Russo. Now, if you know Charlie Russo, Charlie's a big man, 6 foot. He's got to be 6'6" or more. I think he was a former professional tight end for the Giants, and Charlie had that role for many years, and that's really another way of saying you are the dues collector for the members. And, Charlie had his way to go, and if I stood next to Charlie, I'd probably be up to his rib cage. I'm 5'7", not the size of Charlie, and Charlie had a way of getting the members to pay, so it was kind of interesting. That was my first position I held, and what was really good about that was it it had me get to know each of the members because you reached out to each of the members to collect their dues, and I did this for about 3 years, and so I got familiar with, if nothing else, members' names, and I think it was a great way to start off my membership, in the club.
Okay. And eventually you became VP. So how did they wind up getting you to become the VP and eventually the president?
So, it was interesting. Rich DePippo was the president at the time, and Gino was a his vice president. And Gino had opened up a business in Florida, if I remember correctly, and was really bouncing back and forth to Florida. And usually the way Lido works is typically your vice president succeeds you as president. But with Gino's responsibilities, he was not able to commit at that moment in time. And Gino, if you know Gino, was a wonderful, wonderful guy. And he would have made a great president. There's no doubt in my mind. But because of his other obligations, he stepped back and they had an opening. And so I guess I was thrown out there as a name that could possibly step into the role, which I did. Now, usually vice president's a 2-year commitment because that's what the president's commitment is. This was an interesting situation, though. Rich was, if nothing had changed and Gino became president, Rich would have been and would have done his 2-year commitment. But because it all tied into this interesting situation, I ended up being vice president for 1 year as Rich stayed on as president for a 3rd year. So again, kind of getting a little bit thrown into the deep end to figure out what the president's role really was. I don't think you have a real good appreciation until you've, put on the pants of the president, so to speak, and see what that position is. Rich had done a really good job in really growing the club, and it was during a tough time. It was during COVID as well. So there was a lot of things going on there, and that's how I got into becoming vice president and then ultimately taking the next step into president.
So, when you became president, did you have two or three overriding things, two or three things that you really wanted to accomplish as president?
I did. I did. The club's been around a long time. I think you touched on it early on. And the club, at one point was a very small club of Italian American men. It has grown significantly, both in membership and monetarily. And it's almost like a business now. The amount of money we give away, the contributions that and the grants that we give to a number of charities, we've really grown that whole charities entity. And then the club itself, based on its membership numbers, my goal was to do a couple of things. One, there's a lot of great members in this club, and my goal was to put them around me. I was able to start with Michael Montanti as my vice president, who is a young, articulate man who's coming in as president, and he really did some great things. Vito Germanario was my chairman of charities, and Mark Vos took over financial, being the financial chair. And there were a number of other guys, but what I wanted to do was make sure that I had folks around me that had some really not only just would buy into my vision, but had some really good thoughts on how to improve the club. So one of the things that I really wanted to do was we have a great treasurer in Art Del Buono. And Art's been with the club many years and he's handled that role. It's a tough role. One of the biggest things I wanted to do was get him support. We've never brought in an accounting service to really support him, and I always use the "if they drive off the road" theory, then what? And so we've supported Art, and we were able to bring on an accounting service. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a big deal. Secondly, I wanted to make sure that we were doing things efficiently. We've been, living by, pad and paper, if you will, for a long time. And what we ended up doing during my term was really updating and upgrading the website that then took on things like charities applications. So every month or during the course of the year, charities would provide grants to a lot of these charitable entities. And so we created a process for these entities to fill out a application. And this application really kind of made the transparency of who they were, what they do with their money, how much of their money goes to truly their end game and how much, goes into their pocket. It really opened that up to a transparency, but we did it through the website, did it through a application process, and it really allowed us not only to understand who we were giving the money to, but it even helped us give more money out. The other thing was on the back of Vito Germanario, we enhanced our past president night. We increased our attendance, we increased our revenue. That was a big goal to really step that up. I mean, gentlemen, Paul Bachoki and Tom Stallone handled a lot of past president night galas in the past. They did a great job, really set the foundation for that gala. What I was really excited about was Vito then came in and really took that to another level that created us to have a lot of exposure with some new men of the year, along with allowing us to raise a lot of money, and because of that, it allowed us to give more than we've ever given for scholarships. It's allowed us to give more than we've ever given in charitable donations. This past year alone, we gave out $272,000 between scholarships and grants and helping Holy Rosary as well. So that was one of the things I really wanted to do, was really kind of increase and enhance our ability, entrepreneurial, not entrepreneurial, but our giving. So our philanthropic approach. So we were able to do that. So those were some of the things that proud about what we did. And I say we because it wasn't just me. It was a number of really good people who worked really hard to see that vision come through.
And I must say in those and you've listed quite a number of things here that you believe that you and with the help of a number of other people have really accomplished, whether it be an upgraded website, a more streamlined scholarship process, better PPN, all of those sorts of things. And I think that's something to be extremely, extremely proud of. Now a question for you is, what's one thing or maybe two that you wish you could have done differently, or something that, I really wish I could have tackled, but I couldn't?
So I think the biggest thing, when I look back and feel a little bit, what didn't I accomplish that I really was hoping to? And I would tell you to come down to one thing, and that's membership attendance. You know, we meet on a regular basis once a month as a membership, and we have roughly 190 members in our organization, and we, on the average, have about 40 members show every month. And I would tell you that more than 50% of those members are folks who show every month, which means that we're not getting the membership attendance, unfortunately. Now, part of that is because we pull from parts of Virginia and parts of Maryland and parts of DC. So for meetings in Virginia, it's hard for some folks who are way out in Loudoun County maybe to make it all the way up to Bethesda, and vice versa. If the meeting's in Virginia, some of the folks that are up as far up as Baltimore, it's very difficult for them to make it down. And I understand that. But if I had one thing I wish I could have improved on, that would have been the meeting attendance. At the end of every year, we have our Christmas meeting. And my first year as president, we had over 100 people show. This year, we had a little bit more than 80. And I think to myself, well, if we can have those that meeting at the end of the year that brings in so many people, why can't we do it during the year? I don't have an answer for that. I just wish I had a better result for what, and during my 2 years, that I wish we could have come together more as as a club, and I feel like I felt a little bit short there.
Well, I thank you for being honest about that. As I said, I'm a member, for the listeners, I'm a member of the Lido Club, but I think as a president, I think you've done really a spectacular job as president. Lots of things have been accomplished. And as someone who's also held leadership positions, not necessarily in Lido, but in other places, you can't always get everything. You've got to focus on a couple of things. And I think you've really accomplished that.
You know,
But I do have,
the 2 years, Joseph, goes fast. I
Mhm.
will tell you, you find out that that you voted in the president, 2 months before the end of the year. You've gotta get your vision together. You've gotta get your boards together, whether it's the advisory board, your ExCom board, your charities board. There's a lot to do in a short amount of time. And then, you try to take it year 1, I wanna accomplish this, year 2, I wanna accomplish that. And before you know it, you're getting the next group of leaders on board, and, as you're starting to kinda transition, so it goes fast.
Mhm.
But I will tell you, by the time the 2 years are up, you're tired. It's a lot, and, I loved, you know what? I'm honored that I had a chance to do it. this club is very near and dear to my heart. The membership is extremely near and dear to my heart. And so for me to have the honor to have led this club for 2 years, I cannot tell you how much that meant to me.
That's fantastic. Um, and you've kind of touched on this question that I wanted to ask you next, but maybe you have something else in mind. Is what surprised you most about being president of Lido?
I think for me, because I had a little bit of a shorter runway than maybe other vice presidents who've come in, 2 things. One is there were a lot of past presidents that reached out and were always made themselves available to me. Guys like Tom Rignanti, Enzo, who I talked about before, Rich, whenever I called Rich. Those guys made themselves always available. And, I think that there's more to this being president than you really understand walking in the door. And just when you think you understood it, there's a whole nother level of needing to understand what's still involved. And like I said, because of the short 2 years, and it is a short, quick 2 years, it's hard to get your arms around all of it. And, so the surprise was how much is really involved in being president. But the nice surprise was I had so much support to help me through it. Vito Germanario, who I touched on before, was an incredible mentor to me, and he definitely was my advisor from behind the scenes, and really was an ear that I can go to when I really needed to kind of work something out. The one thing that I tried to be sensitive to and respect, change change is hard. And, we made some changes. And then you have some folks who've been part of this organization for 30 and 40 years. And sometimes it's hard for them to accept some of the changes because because they built this club and it's, on their backs. So sometimes influencing change and getting their support takes, some navigation.
Hmm.
I was fortunate to have Lori Clavelli, who's nearly a 40-year member, really, really helped me because he helped me with staying between the lanes, because there's so much in the way that you carry out your role that Lori knows the bylaws. He knows the processes. He knows the right things. And there would be times I'd call Lori and just say, "Lori, am I going about this the right way?" And he would tell me, "You are or you're not," or, "Hey, look, it's," as he would say, "it's your football. Go about it the way you think is the right way." And so, again, having great people around me, not realizing how much of a job it really is, but very fortunate for the folks that supported me in these 2 years.
That's fascinating and really interesting insight. The very last question I have for you, Joe, is where do you see the future of Lido in 3, 5, 10 years?
When I came into the club had about 120 members. We're up to roughly about 190. And I see the club, we had a very big growth spurt. And I don't know that we'll continue to grow as rapidly. But here's what I see. One, I'm a big succession person. I believe that every club, every business needs a succession plan. We have a lot of young Italian Americans coming in. A lot of the members have started to integrate their sons into the club, and I think it's so important to start bringing in the 30-year-olds into the club so they can really grow with the club because ultimately, they're the future of the club. They're the future of the club, and you wanna see, these young men come in, early enough so they can not only appreciate, learn, but then ultimately succeed, some of us older ones that at some point, are transitioning either to the side so they can lead or transitioning out altogether because maybe we're retiring and we're moving. So I think from that standpoint, I think you're going to see an infusion of youth, which I am personally excited about. I think that that's great. I think the other thing is with youth comes energy, and it also comes with some fresh thinking. I think to carry this club forward, we need some of the younger talented folks that understand technology and things that can continue on this legacy of Lido into, the years to come. And I'm excited about that. So I think the club will grow. I think that we'll give out more scholarships. I think that we'll give out more money to the charitable organizations that reach out to us. And that's what Lido's about. Lido's about, take the money in and give it right back out. Nobody takes money, nobody takes a salary. Everything we take in goes right back out to help people. And I only see more of that. And I'm excited about that because I know when I first walked in, what we were giving out and compared to today, what we're now doing, and it's amazing how much more we're doing. And again, it's because of very generous people, it's because the club's growing, and it's because there's a focused effort on continuing to give back to our community.
And Joe, I think you hit on quite a number of things. In particular, two things that stand out to me. Of course, there's the giving piece, and that's fantastic and that's exciting. But one, the younger members coming in, fathers bringing their sons in, and the second is this whole idea of ensuring that you have a succession plan. And that is so important to any organization. Too many organizations out there have no succession plan. Someone says, I got to go. I'm ill. I'm moving tomorrow. And everybody's standing around looking at each other. And I think that's so important that you have been pushing this idea of succession planning, making sure people are lined up to begin to fill in the shoe. So I think that's really, really great. Do you have any other final thoughts?
One, I'm happy, Joseph, that you're doing this podcast, not just because I'm on it, but I think it's wonderful. I There's so much history about Lido and, some of the future podcasts that you'll be doing with some of the guests that you're bringing on that you mentioned to me, it's gonna be really exciting because they hold a lot of knowledge of where this club started, where how it progressed, and I think that that's gonna be really interesting to hear. But other than that, I really thank you for the opportunity to, share these last 30 minutes of not only Lido, but who I am and who my family is and how important being Italian is to me. So I appreciate that.
And I, Joe, cannot thank you enough for agreeing, accepting, and being on here and doing this podcast with me. It's my hope that this will really become a catalyst for Italian and Italian Americans in the DMV as a whole. So once again, let me take this opportunity to say thank you. Thank you for being on. Thank you for taking your time. And time is a precious commodity for all of us these days. And so once again, thank you. But to all of our listeners out there, if you are Italian or Italian American, you live in the DMV and maybe are interested in being on this podcast, being featured in an episode, please feel free to contact me, Joseph Barone, at ciaodmv, CIAODMV at gmail.com. This is Joseph Barone, your host, signing out. Ciao.